In early 1938, the U.S. Navy started researching ways to design new battleships that could keep up with America's own aircraft carriers and outclass the much-feared high-speed Japanese battleships. Consequently, naval architects from the Navy's Bureau of Construction and Repair came up with several solutions, and the result was the impressive Iowa-class battleship, the last kind of American battleship and the last of its type in service around the world. While initial plans called for 6 vessels, only 4 were completed: Iowa, Missouri, Wisconsin, and New Jersey. The latter, nicknamed Big J, was commissioned in 1943, and during the ceremony, Captain Carl F. Holden predicted the battleship would be a, quote, lovely lady who will have her angry moments. The captain was right, as the 887-foot, 60,000-ton Big J saw more combat in World War II than any other Iowa-class battleship, and the 1940s were only the beginning of a long, record-breaking, and highly decorated service career. Big J. USS New Jersey was ordered on July 1, 1939, and was one of 4 completed Iowa-class battleships, including Iowa, Missouri, and Wisconsin. While New Jersey's secondary and tertiary armament continually evolved over time, her main battery, consisting of 9 16-inch 50-caliber Mark VII guns and 3 triple-gun turrets that fired 2,700-pound armor-piercing shells, remained unchanged. Originally designed to have a crew complement of 117 officers and 1,804 crew members, it peaked at over 2,700 sailors due to the ship's increasing anti-aircraft armament throughout the war. USS New Jersey was christened on the first anniversary of the devastating Pearl Harbor attack on December 7, 1942. Launched stern first, the battleship's stern slid across the river to touch her namesake state for a brief moment, and was then towed to dry dock to finish construction and installation of her 3 massive armored gun turrets and much of the topside equipment. In the meantime, the ship's selected crew began to arrive to learn about the equipment they would operate once in dangerous waters. World War II. The USS New Jersey was commissioned into service with the U.S. Navy on May 23, 1943, under the command of Captain Carl F. Holden. Reporting to the Pacific in early 1944, the battleship saw combat for the first time during the Marshall Islands invasion, where the purpose was to establish airfields and naval bases in the area that would later allow air and maritime support for future operations all across the Central Pacific. Only Big J played a role in every significant amphibious invasion after 1943, including the Marshall Islands, New Guinea, the Caroline Islands, the Marianas Islands, the Philippines, the Palau Islands, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. She twice attacked Truk Atoll, the Empire of Japan's main naval base in the South Pacific Theater, and performed the only surface combat of her class, sinking fleeing Japanese warships with her sister and leader ship, Iowa. New Jersey also bombarded several key Japanese bases and escorted carriers while attacking enemy forces on many Pacific islands, including the first major carrier raid on Tokyo, where her crew shot down 20 Japanese warplanes and kamikazes while also rescuing downed American pilots. Also, the Big J battleship fought in the 2 largest and most important battles of the Pacific War. First, in the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, the most significant carrier combat in history. In it, she helped destroy the impenetrable wall of anti-aircraft fire and decimated Japan's naval air arm in the Marianas Turkey Shoot, ending in an American victory. Only 3 months later, she led the Navy's main fleet in the Battle for Leyte Gulf, the largest sea battle of all time. While controversial, the October battle destroyed the Japanese fleet as a fighting force. New Jersey was also the only vessel to serve as a flagship for the U.S.'s 2 greatest admirals in World War II, Raymond Spruance and William Bull Halsey, Jr. As part of the Navy's main fleet, New Jersey took part in the Battle of Formosa, the invasions of Peleliu, Leyte, Mindoro, and Luzon, and the service's sweep through the South China Sea. Together, the 4 Iowa-class battleships spearheaded the American counteroffensive in the Pacific, but New Jersey was clearly the star of the lot. After fighting Axis ships and aircraft, escorting carriers, and bombarding islands all across the Pacific, Big J carried home thousands of American troops, eager to return to the mainland. Korea. There was no place or need for massive battleships in the post-war world, and Big J was decommissioned in 1948. However, unlike many warships that were dismantled and sold for scrap, the Department of Defense decided to maintain the Iowa-class battleships should the need arise. In 1950, when North Korea invaded the South, the United States was prompted by the UN to intervene in the conflict. While caught off guard, President Harry S. Truman quickly sent the American forces stationed in Japan to South Korea. It was time for New Jersey to resurface, and on November 21, 1950, with Captain David M. Tyree in command, the battleship was recalled from the reserve fleet to provide seaborne artillery support. Big J then arrived off the east coast of Korea on May 17, 1951, and the vessel once again became a flagship when Vice Admiral Harold M. Martin, commander of the 7th Fleet, placed his flag on her for 6 months. 3 days after her arrival, New Jersey's guns opened the first shore bombardment of her career in Korea at Wonsan in the north. There, Big J and her crew used her 16-inch guns to fire far beyond the capacity of land artillery, moved at 30 knots from one target to another without seeing any major attack, and interrupted communist supply and communication routes. In addition, the battleship was constantly available upon request to guard aircraft carriers should they require her protection. According to several Navy officials, during her 2 duty tours in Korean waters, she displayed some of the most impressive shooting skills they'd ever seen, while taking part in the Navy's Seaborne Mobile Artillery Team. Then, on her last mission in July of 1953, she destroyed several North Korean bunkers, caves, trenches, and large-caliber guns. Days later, the war was over. The only battleship in Vietnam. New Jersey was decommissioned and placed in the Moth Fleet, or Reserve, on August 21, 1957, where she remained for over a decade. As the Vietnam War reached its crescendo, the loss rates of United States aircraft became astronomical. Thus, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara authorized a study on May 31, 1967, to determine a way to alleviate the air losses while also delivering the required ordnance payloads. The answer came in August of that year, when McNamara decided to recommission the battleship into the Pacific Fleet and increase the naval gunfire support in Vietnam. The vessel would work as a low-risk way to bombard coastal targets day or night, rain or shine, without losing aircraft and pilots. Also, other than tactical aircraft and several torpedo boats, North Vietnam had little in its arsenal that could seriously damage a battleship. New Jersey was the perfect option for this mission, as she was in much better condition than her sisters, and because of the extensive overhaul and maintenance she received prior to her second decommissioning. Big J was officially recommissioned on April 6, 1968, with Captain J. Edward Snyder in command. Upon her reactivation, she underwent another modernization process and was fitted with improved electronics, a helicopter landing, and guns better suited to reach targets in Vietnam. USS New Jersey, now the world's only active battleship, arrived off the coast of Southeast Asia on September 29, 1968. The very next day, the mighty boat fired her guns for the first time in over 16 years, expending a total of 29 16-inch rounds against North Vietnamese targets in and around the demilitarized zone's 17th parallel. During her tour in Southeast Asia, the battleship traveled all along the coast, relieving American tactical air forces from missions nearby. The battleship and her crew also responded to calls for fire from the 101st Airborne Division, the 1st and 3rd Marine Divisions, and the 173rd Airborne Brigade. During her time in Vietnam, between September of 1968 and April of 1969, New Jersey fired a total of 5,688 16-inch gun rounds and almost 15,000 5-inch gun rounds, more than the shells she fired during World War II and the Korean War combined. As predicted, the battleship was never seriously attacked by North Vietnamese forces. Mighty Big J had done it again. A last breath. After her first Vietnam tour, the battleship returned to California to prepare for a second tour that never came, and her crew was stunned to find out the ship was scheduled to be inactivated once again. Even a volunteer military found it difficult to financially support the 1,600-crew vessel while meeting the demands of both Vietnam and the Cold War, and the mighty but old battle wagon was decommissioned once again in 1969. The ship remained as such until President Ronald Reagan initiated the 600-ship Navy in 1981. This program called to rebuild the American Navy's fleet after major cutbacks following the Vietnam War. The strategy was an essential plank of Reagan's 1980 presidential election that advocated for a large and powerful fleet to confront the Soviet Union, and all 4 Iowa-class battleships were eventually reactivated and upgraded with modern combat systems and electronics. Thus, New Jersey and her sister ships were rearmed for the threats of the late Cold War era, and the ship would go on to serve in Lebanon and the Persian Gulf. However, the Red threat had mainly subsided by the end of the decade, and it was clear that battleships were no longer needed in the modern world. Consequently, the majestic battleship was decommissioned for a 4th and supposedly final time. Big J rendered more active service than any of her sister ships, serving for over 21 years, which was 2.5 more times than Iowa, 5 more times than Missouri, and almost a decade more than Wisconsin. She is also the most decorated battleship in United States Navy history, having earned a total of 19 battle and campaign stars. Thank you for watching Dark Seas. Please let us know your thoughts about this mighty battleship in the comment section below. And before you go, don't forget to subscribe to this and all our Dark Documentaries channels. Stay tuned.